Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. I'm very happy right now. Hey guys, I've been a bit slow the past week or two, but I'm feeling a little better, so ready to get back into it. Let's watch and learn. We got Dan Snow, David Mitchell, two of my favorite Brits. Great combo. David Mitchell roasts history's most overrated monarchs. Let's do it. Get cozy.
Bastards, basically. The standard of conduct. Bastards, basically. The standard of conduct is woefully below what we'd expect, even of Hollywood. What you have to do, you have to be horrible. They were all horrible. You have to be willing to kill at a moment's notice. I'm not keen on William the Conqueror, and I'm not keen on Edward the Confessor. I certainly feel that if they swapped roles, they'd both be very unhappy.
One monarch I've learned about, Alfred the Great. Props to him. It was like a 25-minute long video, and it was fantastic. And I learned a lot about Alfred the Great, and he seems very crucial to English history. So,
to what do we owe this great treat? Why are you a colossus delving into our little world of history? What's going on?
I started writing this book during the lockdown when a lot of people are trying to write things, and I hadn't been. And then I started typing about the Vikings.
Oh, brilliant.
Because it occurred to me that COVID is a bit like the Vikings, in that it was a terrible thing that suddenly happened to an unsuspecting community. In the case of my typing, Anglo-Saxon England, and suddenly they were being Anglo-Saxon England in their way, and it wasn't a great life, but they were used to it. And then suddenly the Vikings turned up, and it was grim, and they didn't know why. They didn't know whether they'd stop turning up, whether they'd go away, and just thought that's one of the bleakest things about being a human being. Sometimes a bit of history just happens to you, and there's nothing you can do, and you're a victim of it, and you're not part of it, and you don't have agency. And the Anglo-Saxons, as we did, tried to give themselves some agency by saying it was their fault. And have all the talk about, yes, with COVID, we haven't been preparing enough for pandemics, or that somebody maybe ate a bat, or whatever it was. Let's please, as humanity, let's take ownership of it and make it something we've done to ourselves, rather than the more frightening thing, which is just something that's happening to us that has nothing to do with us and makes us not a villain but just a victim. And that's what happened with the Vikings turning, and the Anglo-Saxons said, oh, it's God's cross with us, we haven't been praying enough, we haven't been holy enough. That wasn't why. It was just because that the socio-economic conditions in Scandinavia shifted slightly, as did maritime technology.
Yeah.
That's what I imagine this would happen with the Sea People. You ever heard of the Sea People? Like being this giant cause of the Bronze Age collapse, and they're very mysterious. Well, if you haven't heard of them prior to that, they weren't a previous foe before that giant influx of Sea People. Well, something huge must have happened in their neck of the woods that made them push so far. Because I can't think of a different explanation than that, because if it wasn't that, then you would expect more of a gradual introduction to these people before all-out wars and stuff, So
you can't control the waters around the island, David, as we know. That's the ongoing problem in British history. So
it used to be Vikings, now it's sewage.
That's a good point. Then they try. I've got images now of the monks on Lindisfarne attempting to sort of enforce social distancing. Sorry, can you just...
Well, it's the ultimate social distancing, just going to Lindisfarne, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
It's time for a new chair. I've sit so long on this chair that it's not very cushiony, and so I have to get a new pillow to make it feel normal.
Why kings and queens? Why do we return? It's so interesting. We return time and again to this. Does it give us this? Does it give us a track and narrative that we can then hang on the rest of British history onto?
I think so. I think for me, certainly in the medieval period that my book's about, that's the basic political narrative, the who's in charge narrative, and that doesn't tell the full story, but it tells one of the main stories, and it has and it leads you through it. In many ways, there are more important things to look at in terms of the lives of the majority of the people, but in terms of characters and story, that's what.
Well, you got to hang it on something, and I can't think of something better than the chain of rulers.
I was
so
drawn to.
Makes
And you
sense.
can't also, one of the reasons my book ends in 1603, and one of the reasons is that after that, if you just talk about the kings and queens, that becomes less and less relevant, and that stops being
get less
even the
power.
main political story after 100 years or so.
I think that's so true, because if we're in this pod, we're going to try and just talk about trying to get a bit of a pecking order going.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it's so hard to compare medieval monarchs with early modern and modern ones, because you end up having to like go, well, was Elizabeth II better than Athelstan? And you're like, it is just, you're comparing two totally different entities, aren't you?
I certainly feel that if they swapped roles, they'd both be very unhappy. I think if Elizabeth II was trying to consolidate Anglo-Saxon control on a partly Viking-occupied island, I don't think that would have been her
And
great
then the other guy would be like, I can't even do anything. What's going on?
strength. And similarly, I think he might have found it a bit frustrating, the endless duty and positivity, and he might just, at some point, can I slash someone to bits with a sword? Go, no, Your Majesty, just now take the posy of flowers and smile.
Whenever I write and think about kings and queens, these are bizarre
I thought this was chest hair for a split second, and then I realized it's the mic. Sorry.
And smile.
Whenever I write and think about kings and queens, this our bizarre habit of starting the king list with William the Conqueror. It just is so strange, isn't it? And you've gone all the way back to the early medieval as well, haven't you?
Well, I thought if we're going to define a book, one of the ways you could define it is say it's about the kings and queens of England. And so you immediately say, okay, so England has to exist.
Alfred.
And England didn't exist. I mean, obviously the
Here I am. I still know so little about Alfred the Great, obviously, and about all of English monarchs, British monarchs, to give a case. But just from learning about him, now I want him to be the beginning. And I'm talking out of place here. So.
physical space did, but no one called it England before the Anglo-Saxons arrived, because that term derives from then. So we can forget about the Romans. And similarly, after Elizabeth I, you got the same monarchy in charge of England as Scotland, and so it starts to be more Britain.
But the big problem we all face, isn't it, is who was the first king of England?
Yes.
It's a nightmare.
Well, it might be Athelstan. It might be Edward the Elder. It's not Alfred the Great.
Sadly not.
No!
But it's around then. As I say in the book, it's a sort of soft launch, the Kingdom of England.
The reason so what I learned about Alfred is that he seems to be, you had Mercia, Wessex, and was it Northumbria? And then you had the Vikings come in and the Danelaw. And then the reason I'm picking out Alfred and I respect him so much is that it seems, it sounds weird saying I respect him so much when I still know so little about him other than a quick video I watched. But it seems like he solidified a sort of how the country was structured and some sort of legal system and a more professional army, it seemed, that didn't exist for England prior to that. And so that's why he seems so awesome to me right now.
And then,
But,
as I say in the book, it's a sort of soft launch
Tell me
for
if
the
I'm
Kingdom
wrong.
of England. Because the Anglos, before the Vikings came, the Anglo-Saxons definitely had lots of different kingdoms and a vague sense that they're from the same cultural root, but no real sense that the notion of England is really forged in opposition to the Vikings.
Were you kind of drawn towards those early monarchs? I find them increasingly interesting, only because we overlooked them until quite recently. They just weren't part of our kind of national story.
I like it because it's so confusing.
Definitely.
You understand why there's been so much televising of the Tudors, because you sort of know where you are. There's a handful of easy characters to get a grip on.
You can assume a bit of knowledge in the audience. Everyone knows where they are.
But the Wars of the Roses, it's all over the place, and I even since writing the book, I've forgotten most of it.
Okay,
but
great.
the Plantagenets going into the two cadet branches of York and Lancaster, that's the big muddle of what basically happened in medieval England that I used writing this book to briefly get a sort of grip on. But the confusingness of it is attractive.
I think it's also probably tempting and attractive to start with William the Conqueror, because if you start with William the Conqueror, then you can claim, rightfully so, that you haven't been invaded successfully since, Whereas if you start a bit before, then you have to include a successful invasion. So I get the allure towards him being the start.
And that's what all kingship is. Our notion of kings is partly Henry VIII, but apart from his big iconic figure, we're thinking of kings that were in that period. That's the proper period of kings. That's when all of the aesthetic of kingship derives from that time. They had crowns, they had shields, they had coats of arms, and that's what. And they all of the pictures of King Arthur have him like that, even though if he had existed, which he didn't, he was a millennium earlier and would have had very, very different clobber. Probably a bit of an old toga.
From that same video, I also learned that King Arthur could have been based on a true person. And so maybe he wasn't completely out of the air contrived of, but it's cool to think he might actually have some basis in reality, although the vast majority of everything attached to him might be completely made up. So,
clinging on.
If anything I'm saying is wrong, please point it out.
Clobber. Probably a bit of an old toga,
clinging on to the remnant
half a gladius and a sandal.
Is writing a history book sort of dad? Is that one of the dad sort of things to tick off? Like it's dad life, hashtag dad life. Because the reason I ask you about writing history books, it strikes me that one of your more famous alter egos, someone who you've had to struggle in the past to put distance between you and this fictional person. He wanted to write a book called Business Secrets of the Pharaohs, I think.
Yes. Well, look, I can't say that I've entirely escaped the shadow of Mark Corrigan.
It's similar to how I view Michael Scott and Steve Carell, in that I can't even see them as separate people. Not only are they associated with something like The American Office, which I've loved so much and I've seen many times, they also seem like they weren't even acting that much. And the same goes with Mark Corrigan and David Mitchell, is that not only are they part of a thing that I've watched and loved, I'm still watching the episodes also. I think I'm in season 7. But they also, they don't seem to be that much different than the character themselves.
In writing.
And so David Mitchell and Mark Corrigan are always kind of... Anyways.
That I've entirely escaped the shadow of Mark Corrigan in writing a history book. This is a book that he might be interested in.
Well, I think so.
But But the thing about him and me, we were young fogies, and now I'm gradually growing into the appropriate age for fogey.
That's as another young fogey. It's quite nice because all your friends suddenly join. You don't move. You remain as interested in Stalingrad as you were at 19.
Yeah.
But strangely, your sort of weird mates who are interested in like house music and other things start to, and then sometimes surpass you. Like I've got mates now who are like writing detailed descriptions. Their grandfather at the Battle of Passchendaele. I'm like, you've overshot the runway.
Yeah. Yes. What's your music collection looking like now?
Exactly. I love that people's different perspectives on all the monarchs. Can we just start with like any that you are just sick of and you think are massively overrated?
I'm not keen on William the Conqueror.
Okay.
I'm not keen on William the Conqueror, and I'm not keen on Edward the Confessor. Well, now, I wouldn't say Edward the Confessor is massively overrated, but
no one likes him.
Well, I'm very glad to hear it, because it seems like lots of people like him. They allow him to call himself Edward the Confessor and talk about his holiness and his praying.
Absolutely useless man.
He was a useless man.
Totally.
He sowed the seeds of discord.
Absolutely. Do we not like William the Conqueror because you have a kind of nostalgic love for the Anglo-Saxon, sort of all a bit 19th century, a bit nostalgic for that? Or do you just think he was a right bastard who was just a violent psychopath?
Or maybe a third option, maybe it's because he's so much attributed to the start of England and English history that you get a bit annoyed because he wasn't much deserving of any more praise than people after him or before him, maybe?
Well, they were
who was just a violent psychopath.
Well, they were all right bastards, basically. In terms of the standard of conduct is woefully below what we'd expect, even of Hollywood. There were so many times in the Middle Ages where people are just waiting for this useless bastard to die, and very occasionally they go, well, it could be ages, even though it's the Middle Ages and people just drop dead for no reason all the time. we just can't wait for him to die. We're going to have to do something else.
Edward II, I'm sorry.
It's just too long. He might not die for 30 years.
Yeah, we can't come.
His father made old bones.
His dad made old bones, and his son did all.
Richard II, similarly.
Yeah.
It's going to be too long before he dies. We're just going to have to put him in a castle and starve him.
So, William the Conqueror, you don't like him because you're affectionate.
You've got to pick a side, right?
Okay,
I mean, that may be that some academic historians would say you don't.
I think possibly.
But I think they've lost the joy. But I think the Battle of Hastings, one of the first things you get taught about, or I got taught about, and you've got to pick a side. Do you want to pick the invading Normans, or do you want to pick the Harold sitting on Senlac Hill? And I picked Harold. Most of the people in my class picked Harold, but turns out, sadly, spoiler alert for people who haven't yet bought the book, Harold loses.
Crikey.
And that's a bit of a shame. And it's one of the good reasons not to start your history of the kings and queens of England with William the Conqueror, because it's a bit of a pisser.
Harold's an attractive character, I think.
Yeah, he's very obviously had no birthright to be king, but that we feel more relaxed about that now that we're not so keen on the whole notion of people being in charge because of a birthright. But he was professional. He was organised. He did everything right, except and he would have won the Battle of Hastings if his army had listened to him.
And his brother.
Also, I wonder if I'm going to go back 5 seconds. I wonder what would happen if he didn't have to first go fight people in the north and then come back and fight the invading Normans. You know, I wonder what would have happened if it was more of a just you didn't have to worry about anything else and just focus on this one invading army. And as far as
Organised. He did everything right, except and he would have won the Battle of Hastings if his army had listened to him.
See, that's something that I can't really expand on because I don't know exactly what he's talking about in detail.
Tostig was obviously such a horrible person. Harold got rid of him.
We all know families can be difficult, and I feel for Harold trying to deal with Tostig. And he's got a nice earldom in the north. Things are going nicely for him, but he pushes his luck, and and I think Harold deals with it with great dignity.
So you're a Harold fan.
Yeah.
You are not a William fan. Anyone else overrated?
I think the Tudors in general are overrated because they're not, and their imagery is great. The portraits of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I in particular, that's great iconography.
Also probably the first monarch that Americans learn about, maybe not so much in detail, but I can guarantee, maybe not guarantee, that might be strong, that if you mention the name Henry VIII to Americans, they will at the very least, be like, that rings a bell. Whereas every other monarch, except maybe the one currently as king or queen, might just be like, who the hell is, I don't know who that is. So that's interesting. Also, the more I learn about English history, far from well-versed, as much as I've been trying to for years now, he does seem to have a lot of really important things about how England functioned in connection to just the rules and laws, and also how England interacted with the church. And so on one part, it might seem easy to say he's overrated, and I don't have the expertise to really say yes or no, but at the same time, he does seem to have changed a lot, so...
But they're a bit of an afterthought first, in particular. That's great iconography. But they're a bit of an afterthought of medieval kingship, really. And I think in their time, England is essentially accepting its own mediocrity. Henry VIII, it's got to be said, he's been overcovered, but he is a lot of fun. I understand why he's had so much coverage, and in a way, looked at in terms of if you take the job of a king not to be to rule his own age, but to give lots of interesting stories to
Great
posterity.
content provider.
He has been an amazing content provider, and I do accept that he's fun, but I've had a bit of enough of him. And also, if you think about him for more than 5 minutes, he was so awful, unbearable. You know, almost you'd rather a complete tyrant. But the fact that he had a sort of an intelligent, thoughtful, intellectual side to him almost makes his tantrums and his
crushing insecurity.
Yeah, all the more contemptible.
So completely understand that. This can go for anyone. If there's two people, one of them acts in a horrible way, but like says, "Yeah, I'm horrible, and this is how I'm going to act." They're almost more bearable. They are more bearable than the person who does the same actions, but professes to not be that way. So I understand that.
You're a blood and thunder guy. I mean, you like a king. Was it Henry IV of Navarre and of France said, I rule with my arse in my saddle and my sword in my hand. That's your archetype.
Well, that was the way to do it. That's what Henry II did, and he's one of the most effective medieval monarchs, albeit one who...
I think that right there, talking about like kings, I think that might be more judgment of the times rather than the person, you know? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Henry II did, and he's one of the most effective medieval monarchs, albeit one who sort of met with a sad, lonely end.
Yeah.
Henry I was great, and he's a professional.
I like it. I agree.
He
got rid of his brothers.
Yeah. He usurped the throne brutally, which is,
Well, no, there was a terribly unfortunate hunting accident in the New Forest where poor Prince Harry saw his older brother William get killed very accidentally and not on purpose at all.
Well, he definitely bounced back quickly from his grief.
Oh, God, no. Anyways, I'm king now. Anyways, I'm in charge. Sorry.
Purpose at all.
Well, he definitely bounced back quickly from his grief, and got in ahead of the elder brother. I mean, what a life!
One of life's losers.
Yeah,
one of history's losers.
Robert Curthose, who died. He was made very old bones, but spent most of his life in Cardiff Castle.
Yeah.
And Cardiff wasn't the vibrant centre then that it is now. So I feel sorry for him. But no, Henry I, it just feels like he's professional. He got it. What you have to do, you have to be horrible. They were all horrible. You have to be willing to kill at a moment's notice. But if you do it with a rationale, you do it even-handedly, you don't have favourites, and you have some notion of the stable government you want to be heading to.
That's the best anyone could be able to hope for.
Then it can work out. And he created a very peaceful kingdom, albeit through violence.
Like the idea of like, hey, I'm one person, I'm one human, and I know that I'm pushing through this in a brutal way, but these are my intentions. I have this capability at this moment, and I'm using it. Let's see what happens. I can at least, maybe not on board with it, but I can respect the wherewithal to know that, hey, I have the power to do this. It might not work out, but I have these levers and I'm going to do it. I can respect that,
And in those days, that's sort of as good as it gets. And also, another thing
I would say even nowadays,
he doesn't do.
There's less, centralized power.
And in
most
those days,
places.
that's sort of as good as it gets. And also, another thing he doesn't do that many of the other ones that vie for best king, they all do, is he didn't try and conquer too many other places. That puts a lot of pressure on the kingdom when the hundreds of years where every king of England is trying also to be king of France, and it's not really viable. But he said, no, I've got Normandy in England, and I'm going to stick.
Happy days.
Yeah.
Okay, so Tudors overrated, William the Conqueror's overrated. Anybody else that you came to really think was... Elizabeth Tudor usually tops the list, doesn't she? Elizabeth I.
She I suppose she is overrated. She wasn't amazing.
I struggle with her, because sometimes
I think of the Spanish Armada stuff, I don't know how involved she was.
I suppose she is overrated. She wasn't amazing.
I struggle with her, because sometimes I think, God, what amazing, and all that kind of clever politics. And then partly you think, well, Ireland was a disaster. She left she didn't solve any of the big problems. She delayed all the big problems. Didn't seem to solve any of them. So I struggle with her. So.
Well, the thing about her that people don't seem to say, but strikes me, and it's a success of her brand building that people don't say, is she was just very, very cautious.
Yeah.
And she inherited the throne at a time where she was the daughter of Anne Boleyn. The country is hugely divided, religiously speaking. She was in an extremely insecure position and had a tricky life up to then. So I understand the caution. It's an intelligent person's response, but she sort of knew she was on a sticky wicket and behaved like it, really. And she was, repelling the Armada went well, but everything she actively pushed out into the world was essentially underfunded and nervously done.
One of the things that I'll try and explain what I'm trying to say through, like, you have the question. I'll ask you this question: who is the most evil person to ever live? Right? I'm structuring that carefully. Who is the most evil person to ever live? And I will respond, no matter what answer you give me, is that the most evil person to ever live is definitely not known about. Because you have, in order to, I'm not saying the most evil person to ever live who is able to do something evil. You have to be able to have the ability to carry out your actions that you want to happen in order to be in that conversation. And so I use that as, I think we shouldn't judge people like Monarchs, who there are only a few people who are able to reach that status, as on this giant scale of humans, right? Because only a certain amount of humans are able to use the power that they get. And so we have to judge people who had large power with the idea in mind that we're only looking at this very small sliver of humans that are able to do this and then carry it out. You know what I'm saying? I think often we think about like Monarchs as if any person who has ever existed could have done the good or bad that they did. It's just that they didn't. Well, no, you have to, we're looking at a very small sample size of humanity. And so it's hard to really gauge just how bad or good they are. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Kind of. Maybe. Agree, disagree?
Well,
But one sec, guys. All right. Sorry, guys. Continue.
Yeah, she
was essentially underfunded and nervously. And she was, repelling the Armada went well, but everything she actively pushed out into the world was essentially underfunded and nervously done.
Well, she underfunded the poor old sailors who fought in the Armada as well, and to their great detriment. So,
well, she sort of launched her own Armada, didn't she?
Oh, yeah,
a couple of years later, that went at least as bad.
We've got that one. Yeah. What's our? Dare I ask? Have we got top three?
Well, I think Henry II was pretty amazing.
I think so too.
And he held together, I mean, most of France as well as England, and it's all down to energy. And also I think he wasn't great at dealing with his own family, because the relentlessness with which his sons tried to overthrow him to me, it suggests that he must have been a difficult chap, domestically speaking.
But he's good. First and second.
Yeah, but I'm wondering about...
Or some of his family members could have been insane. You can't go one way or the other without really knowing.
No, but he's good.
First and second.
Yeah, but I'm wondering about...
But
he's good.
First and second.
Yeah, but I'm wondering about the big two in terms of trying to conquer France are Henry V and Edward III.
Yeah.
They both tried with all their might to take over France, and they both nearly succeeded. But the whole notion of trying to take over France is so ridiculous that can you count them great kings? For that they've devoted themselves to something that was it was a horrible experience for both of the armies and the poor French. I mean, you sort of think about all the famous battles of the 100 Years' War, Poitiers, Crécy, and Agincourt. These great victories where outnumbered English armies destroy huge French armies because the French armies have got a ridiculous strategy. It makes the English the underdogs, and it makes us feel all good and
Hey, they have that looks like the Denmark flag. These the English archer. Maybe it's
armies
completely unrelated.
destroy
I don't
huge
know.
French armies because the French armies have got a ridiculous strategy. It makes the English the underdogs, and it makes us feel all good and plucky. But the reality is all of this is happening in France. The reason the English are so outnumbered is that they have left home in order to destroy the lives, livelihoods, crops and villages of people in a neighbouring country who've done them no harm. So that suddenly slightly turns around the whole plucky underdog thing to say, no, what they are is nasty thieving bandits. And you know, sometimes a burglar will be in a house and find himself outnumbered by the people that live there, but that doesn't make him plucky.
I think you're setting quite a difficult set of parameters, because you like a thug, but you don't.
If they win,
you don't want them to
thugs.
be. Yeah, exactly. But you don't want them to be. You like them to be sort of thuggish within a kind of national community rather than invading the next door one.
Yes. Well, I think what I'm expecting. Firstly, you say I like a thug. I think the thuggish nature of government then was regrettable.
Yeah.
But it's all thuggish.
Yeah.
So you can choose the sort of bonkers thugs that you don't know what they're going to do next. The more even-handed thugs.
Yeah.
The thugs that fail in their aims. The more successful thugs.
yeah, I wonder if he would think of them differently, the ones that intervened in France, if it ended up with a win and control of France that lasted. I'm curious if that would change any of David Mitchell's thoughts.
The thugs that fail in their aims, the more successful thugs.
Well, he's explaining
and so
it there,
on the basis
so.
that they're all thugs,
Yes.
I'm picking the even-handed successful thugs over the unsuccessful capricious thugs.
I can't argue with that. That's fair.
That's very clear. I have a soft spot for Henry III, who I don't think was thuggish enough, but
He's certainly his worst enemy wouldn't call him a thug. You're right. Henry III and indeed Richard II and Ethelred the Unready, the unusual thing, a medieval king that doesn't really want to go to war.
Henry VI. Poor Henry VI.
And Henry VI, he's another one. But yeah, he was. I mean, he had more problems.
He looks so sad.
Than that. You know, nowadays we don't want our leaders starting wars. In those days, if you didn't want to ride into battle, it's a big part of the job description that you're not willing to cover.
Now I want to go cover Henry VI because I don't know what they're talking about.
What makes good king or queen? I mean, the organised violence side of it aside, is there anything else?
I think all of the things that we expect from government today, you've just got to ignore that. They're not trying for any of it. They're not trying for peace. On the contrary, they're waging war. In terms of education and healthcare, they're not interested. Forget about it. So all you can expect is stability. That's the good kings provide stability, the bad kings don't. And that stability comes from being predictable in your actions and firm and not having favourites. And I think that's why the people, Henry I was particularly good at that. He's even-handed. He didn't have a clique. The worst kings, the ones that caused the most trouble, Richard II, Edward II, Henry VI, have favourites.
You were talking about kingship like they don't have human bodies themselves.
I would say so. I'm going to say something about Alfred the Great, whereas 1 week ago I knew nothing about him, and now I know a little bit about him from a 28-minute long video. Okay, so I feel weird even being like a week ago I'd be like I have no clue, and now I'm saying like Alfred the Great is the best. You know, I understand the ridiculousness of that. You know, but I'm going to say it anyways. The reason why I had Alfred the Great impressed me so much, and the little I've learned about him, is that he created what was not there before and what was built upon later. And so him establishing the relationship between the king and the person below him and the people below him and the person below him, all the way down to the person who worked the fields, right? And he just seemed to create structure that was built upon and successful that wasn't there before and that was built upon after. And so his influence on the rest of history seems to be vast. But again, coming from me, the furthest from an expert, That's just what I have to say. So
I now, as I get older, I realise how different I am at various different stages in my life. And these people, as you mentioned, like Edward III, they're trying to be Edward III, but you know, well, you can be Edward III as a young man, but then you've also got to be Edward III as a guy crippled with musculoskeletal pain, and you know, it's fascinating, isn't it? How they age, and then that changes the nature of their rule.
Yes, and perhaps we expect too much of them. And but one of the biggest mistakes, I think,
I guess Henry VIII would be a good example of what Dan Snow just said. I hear Henry VIII was quite good early on, but as he got older, he got that kind of more ruthless reputation. And I guess as he did get heavier and older and more ill, then he started to strike out a bit. So, yeah.
We expect too much of them. And but one of the biggest mistakes I think Henry I made was at the end of his reign, when he caused a rift between himself and Geoffrey of Anjou and Matilda, his daughter, who was, you know, his designated heir. And because he basically refused to give Geoffrey some castles that had been promised to him. And that is an old man clinging on to all of his possessions and telling himself he's frightened that if he gives these castles to Geoffrey, that's going to start Geoffrey trying to take over Normandy.
I'm sure that's a paranoia that has to do with the fact that as you're getting older and more ill, and your mortality is right in your face, that you could die at any moment, and then you have no control over anything, and so then people start to micromanage things so that they can hold on to anything they have without a more thorough plan that you might have when you're younger, and know that you have possibly decades to live and can manipulate stuff. And so that seems pretty human to me.
Which I think
of
these
a reaction
castles to Geoffrey,
although not great, it's not surprising, I guess.
And telling himself he's frightened that if he gives these castles to Geoffrey, that's going to start Geoffrey trying to take over Normandy, which I think there's no evidence for at all. But the fear he's feeling really is of death. But he projects that onto his son-in-law. And as a result of that rift, that gave Stephen, the next king, the excuse to claim that Henry I didn't really want Matilda to inherit the throne, and that causes 20 years of civil war. And that's the product of the changing mentality of an aging man. And obviously Edward III, he completely outlived his faculties, and that was a shame as well. He'd been this great general and quite a good leader, and clearly an effective father, because his family liked him, and had a strong marriage with his queen, but then she died, and he starts to lose his grip and is very much in the thrall of his lover, and the country starts going bankrupt because he's still trying to fight a war in France, and it's a very, very sad end to a very glorious reign.
I think wives are important, and they're often overlooked, aren't they? I think Henry I had a very good wife, and Henry II had a remarkable wife. And as you say, but I think that those are some of the details that we can ignore, perhaps, as traditionally men have written about them through the kind of military lens.
And we don't hear so much about the queens, the queen consort.
Speaking of amazing wives, we've got Ella of Aquitaine, we kind of mentioned, but then Emma of Normandy is fascinating, isn't she? Being wife of two kings.
Emma of Normandy was married initially to Ethelred the Unready. She was his second wife. His first wife was called Elfiefu, and so he made Emma change her name to Elfiefu. Made things easier for him. But anyway, when he died, she then married made things easier for him. But anyway, when he died, she then married the next king, but one, Canute. And so she's from Normandy, and she's married into the Anglo-Saxon royal house and then the Danish royal house. And her son by Ethelred the Unready, Edward the Confessor, was later king. Her son by Canute, Harthacnut, was later king. She was a major sort of power node at that time, and she kicks off the whole relationship between England and Normandy, and we know where that led. And so we don't have any of her words. We don't really know what she was thinking or saying, but she was right at the centre of things and an amazing survivor. So yeah, it's a sort of sign that there are powerful women doing things as well, but we're not necessarily as aware of them as we should be.
When you're sitting there in modern Britain, writing away, do you think these men and women, did they matter? Like, the older I get, the more I'm or is it all just science and engineering and microbes? And do you think that the people in charge make a difference throughout?
Well, yes, I wish I knew. They definitely.
I'm expecting an actual comprehensive answer right now.
They definitely make a difference in the short term. But here's the big question in terms of the period I've done. You've got for a long time in the Anglo-Saxon period, all the relationships from England are with Scandinavian kingdoms because of the Vikings. And you have King Canute, who is basically rules England and much of Scandinavia, and it sort of feels like that's England's orbit. And then suddenly a few of the right people die, and that all changes, and William the Conqueror comes over, and England's orbit is all France. And then you have Henry II, and it's almost like the whole direction the country's looking in swivels round. Was that inevitable? Would that have happened if
Canute's kids hadn't been so bloody useless?
Well, yeah.
The problem with arguments like this is that if they didn't, if they weren't as powerful as they were, and if stuff was different that changed the trajectory of history, we would then be in that timeline talking about what would happen if those new people in that timeline weren't there. And so this is a kind of survivorship bias argument that obviously there's going to be a difference if certain people that lived didn't live, or certain people that had influence didn't have influence. But we would be asking that question no matter who lived and was in charge. And so there's sort of a not a uselessness. I'm going to say uselessness to this argument, but I'm not saying that it had no effect. You know what I mean? But there's something about this argument that's like, it's survivorship bias. It's like what happened was always supposed to happen, and that's ridiculous. You throw a bunch of darts outside of a plane, okay, and then they land somewhere, and you're like, what if they didn't land there? Well, then they would have landed somewhere else, and we'd be asking, what if they didn't land there? And so I'm not saying it doesn't have an effect, but it's almost a sort of, you know what I mean? Like,
yes, would that have happened if we know?
I'm not trying to discredit.
If Canute's kids hadn't been so bloody useless.
Well, yes, if he'd had more effective heirs, or if William the Conqueror had lost at Hastings, which could easily have happened, Harold the Godwinson's very much more Scandinavian looking. Would that trend have continued, or was the impact on England of Normandy and by extension France inevitable?
Another thing that you just brought up that I want to talk about is that it's talking like this is the problem with alternate history videos, and not just videos, just thinking about alternate history, is that a lot of what is portrayed in alternate history videos, you can't know the future, and so they tend to extrapolate things that happened, if they had happened differently, to also extend to hundreds of years after, but you have no idea what other historical event would have happened. You know what I mean? And so it's like saying, for a perfect example, it's like saying if the Vikings had defeated Alfred the Great, or if Harold Godwinson had defeated William the Conqueror, then that means that it would be purely English today, or purely Norwegian influence today. That is an alternate history where you're not taking into account things that you can't possibly imagine, which are inevitable to happen. You know what I mean?
Would that trend have continued, or was the impact on England of Normandy and by extension France inevitable? That cultural power was a force beyond the control of any man or men. So without William the Conqueror, would the Anglo-Saxon royal house still have basically been dealing with France 100 years later? Yeah. And you see how I've avoided answering your question by just reposing it.
What a pro.
I could be a politician, couldn't I?
Should be.
That's a self-aware man.
Yeah. It's wasted. Best monarch to go for a beer with?
Monarch to go for a beer with.
Henry.
I think young Henry VIII.
Oh, okay.
I think young Henry VIII, he'd be good company, but I wouldn't trust him.
Best monarch.
See how I just said Henry without saying Henry VIII? That's a classic American. Just being like Henry, King Henry is Henry VIII to us.
To be your brother-in-law to marry your sister.
To marry your sister? That's
the unready guy.
I mean, that is an incredibly specific
Oh, it's a
question.
dumb
I'm-
I'd like my brother-in-law is not listed.
Okay,
He's
no,
not
you're
on
going to
my
have
list.
to. Best Edward IV. Yeah.
Bit of a shagger.
He was a bit of a shagger. I tell you what he did for his wife's family.
Okay.
Dan Snow is a legend.
He was a bit of a shagger. I tell you what he did for his wife's family.
Okay. That's a very good way of looking at it.
Absolutely showered them with wealth. But also, I think Edward IV is
gonna
slightly
say
underrated
children.
as well,
So can I
because he was quite capable.
David Mitchell's sister is listening to this podcast. You are there.
I don't have a sister.
Well, there you go. That's why. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
True.
She is there simply
That does make sense now.
to bring.
That he would choose and not care.
Well, there you go. That's why. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. She is there simply to bring honours and jewels upon the rest of the family. I love it.
I think
Family jewels.
they would have said that family that he made an okay brother-in-law. Yeah.
That's true. And then his little brother came along and had them all killed.
Yeah.
Best month's gone a stag night team building exercise on a windswept island off the coast.
Right, now what do you want from someone like that? You're on a team building. I mean, if what you
William
if,
the Conqueror.
If you want the monarch who will guide you to the latest pub the nearest pub that has nice rooms, so you can avoid the
Henry
whole
the
team
Navigator.
building
Yeah.
exercise. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think maybe
Relatable.
you see, Edward IV would be quite good for that sort of thing. He liked his creature comforts. I mean, they killed him in the end. But I'm going to try and think of someone. Richard the Lionheart.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
He was good. He was good at logistics, and yeah, I think if you could say, if you could tell him it was the holy thing to do, you need to say we need to go on a crusade to find the pub.
Yeah. He did well on Cyprus, which is an island. So there, I guess.
Yeah.
David Mitchell, thank you very much for coming on this this show. What is the book called?
It's called Unruly.
Unruly.
And it does all of the kings of England from the Anglo-Saxons to Elizabeth I.
All of your medieval kingship
Be a good
needs
read for
will
me.
be met.
And it has colour photography.
What?
Yeah, although no photographs of the actual kings and queens, sadly. But that's because photography wasn't invented in time. It's not my fault.
Yeah.
So instead you have the dreadful drawings that were done of them by various medieval monks.
Very good. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
David, how are you?
Oh, very well, thank you.
Well, it's good to have you.
When
Now,
you say live, this isn't live.
No, it's not live.
No,
No.
live recording.
Did I say live? Yeah,
It's
well,
a live recording.
well, I mean,
That's
yes,
actually a contradiction.
well, it's a.
We're live now, but we may be dead by the time people watch this.
It's Naz live.
Unscripted recording. What are some of those movies? Like the Rush Hour movies, like movies with Jackie Chan usually. Rush Hour movies, the Shanghai Noon, Shanghai Night movies would have. I love the movies that have the blooper reels at the end, and even some like Pixar movies will have funny animated bloopers. Obviously, they're created with intention. Obviously, they're animations. That reminded me of it. Anyways, fantastic video. Two of my favorite British people that I watch on YouTube and in shows. David Mitchell. Why am I? Why? Well, Dan Snow. Jesus Christ! I can't believe I had to blank on that name. Perfect. I enjoyed that a lot. If you notice in my videos, often sometimes I try to like measure myself and not talk too much in the beginning of the video, but when it gets towards the end, I just kind of throw that all out the window and just say what I want to say. So, love y'all. Hope you're all doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below. If I said anything you disagree with, call me out. Would love nothing more. Any comments at all. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope I see you next time. Too long of a conclusion. See you guys next time. Bye.